It's pretty private to ask somebody about it.
You end up apologizing.
I don't have to answer questions from them. You're not understanding what I'm saying.
Simply because the color of your skin.
I'm not saying it. Well, you are upsetting me because read your question carefully. There's 5 minutes left.
And so right there was a very infamous interview between Elon Musk and Don Lemon. You see, this interview right here could be used to illustrate a couple of points in psychology. I'm talking body language, I'm talking emotions, and I'm talking delusion. But I wouldn't want to get into any of those for now. The point I'd like to make in this video actually would be to illustrate how Don Lemon disobeyed Robert Greene's first law of the 48 laws of power and the consequences he had to face. You see, I'm assuming that you all are versed with the various aspects of this video. But for those living under the rocks, I'll try to get you guys up to speed real fast. So Elon Musk, of course, is a household name in our time. He's currently the world's richest man, and he runs this many companies that are basically shaping our world. And quite recently, he bought the company Twitter, transformed it to X, and has declared himself an advocate of free speech. And on the other hand, we got Don Lemon, who worked as a journalist for CNN for a very long time. And lastly, we got Robert Greene, who is the author of one of the best books, in my opinion, to have been written in the last century, The 48 Laws of Power. I'm hoping you all read that book, but if not, please do. Because to me, that counts as one of the best books that have been written in the last few hundred years. So in this book, he outlines 48 laws, which are actually just 48 guidelines based on research going back in time into human behavior and human psychology, all right? That if anyone will learn, then they will definitely understand human psychology better or human behavior better, and definitely get to have a better ride through the course of life. But of course, we ain't gonna be looking at all the 48 laws. We're gonna be focusing on law number 1, just one of the laws. That's what I wanna talk about. First, I'm going to summarize the law, then go ahead to show you how Don Lemon, in his interview with Elon Musk, perfectly broke the law and the consequences he faced thereof. So law number 1 simply says, never outshine the master. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please or impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the height of power. So that's law number 1. And what really makes this book a masterpiece is the depth of research that went into writing this book. Because every law is substantiated with a good number of examples going back and back and back in time, proving that human behavior doesn't change that easily. And one of the key examples supporting this law would go a few hundred years back and would be of the French monarch and king, Louis XIV. You see, Louis XIV was the king and monarch of France sometime in the 17th century. And he was a very powerful man, and you could tell he liked power. He had a penchant for power. And one of the ways you know that is by the famous phrase by which he's famously known, L'état c'est moi, which translates quite simply as I am the state. Imagine how he liked power. So at some point in time in the course of his reign, his prime minister would pass on, and he would go ahead to abolish the office of the prime minister and rather have that position be filled by one of his smaller ministers, his finance minister actually, a man who went by the name of Nicolas Fouquet. Now, Nicolas Fouquet, understanding the state of affairs and knowing fully well that, the monarch, the king, had found favor in him, and he was going to take on this next position. He was going to take on the position of the prime minister, right? Decided to impress the king in a bid to show gratitude in his limited mindset, all right? And so he would go on to organize one of the most flamboyant, lavish parties of all times in one of his most magnificent chateaus, and then invite the king over, Louis XIV, in what would turn out to be one of his most erroneous decisions ever. So the D-Day eventually comes. And as you would expect, the palace, the arena was filled with some of the most important people in society. The movers and shakers of town were all present. And so the king arrived and couldn't help but notice how everyone kind of adored Nicolas Fouquet. They admired the palace he had built and showered him with praises as they all enjoyed luxurious meals served on plates made of gold. But by such display of extravagance and luxury, Fouquet had unintentionally tilted the spotlight to himself rather than on the one person who needed it, the king, his master. Needless to say, there would be hell to pay for that, as a few days later, Fouquet would be arrested and sent to prison, where he would spend the remainder 20 years of his life. So that was a couple centuries ago. And if you felt like, well, maybe that would be a little bit aloof to your reality because of the time frame, then let's bring it back to our day and look at this interview, this interaction between Elon and Don Lemon. And you would see the similarities and what happened then and what just transpired between Elon and Don Lemon. So sometime in 2023, Don Lemon parts ways with CNN after more than 10 years of work. So he's literally in the job market until at some point in time he gets into some negotiations with Elon Musk to run his show on X, a platform owned by Elon. And definitely you would tell that it was a lucrative deal because come on, what else do you expect when you have a negotiation with the world's richest man, all right? It's got to be lucrative. And so this man's career has been saved. He's finally got a job. And he decides that his very first talk show, his comeback into the world of media, would be with an interview with Elon Musk, which of course is a wonderful strategy because the world is always curious to know whatever Elon is thinking or saying, all right? And so definitely people will be tuning in their millions to listen to this interview. And so the interview is publicized and people are waiting impatiently. And here the day finally comes. Elon shows up for the interview, and Don Lemon will go on to orchestrate the most shambolic of interviews in the history of interviews. In an effort to make a momentous comeback, he would go on to ask some of the most bizarre questions ever. Questions that quite clearly make Musk uncomfortable. He would bring up things like his medical records, for example.
I mean, it's pretty private to ask somebody about a medical prescription, you know.
Bring up some of his most controversial tweets from the past.
To the tweet about that, you ended up apologizing.
He would insinuate he promotes hate speech on his platform.
We don't promote hate speech.
And so you don't consider that hate speech?
I guess you're not understanding what I'm saying.
He would bring up legal issues he has had with some of his companies. He would put words into Elon's mouth.
I'm not saying it. Don, you keep putting words in my mouth.
He would bring up racism without any grounds for that.
Simply because the color of your skin.
He would point out to one of Elon's spelling errors on one of his tweets.
Them to change this crazy policy of DIE. I don't know if did you misspell it on purpose, which meant it should be DEI. Do you believe that when
he would do all these things? You can go watch the interview if you haven't already. And even though he doesn't quite get a gotcha moment, which is what I think he was looking for all through the interview, you could tell he succeeded in making Musk uncomfortable.
Well, you are upsetting me because the way you're phrasing questions, I think, is not cogent.
I mean, you watch this interview and you see Musk display a wide array of emotions, all right? He comes in all jovial and happy, imagining that, well, this is gonna be a fun ride, thinking that Lemon would be doing the natural thing, which is returning the favor. In this case, metaphorically kissing his ring, all right? But Lemon doesn't do that. That's not what he does, because he comes up and tries to put the spotlight on himself. Elon comes up all jovial and smiley, but just a few minutes into the interview, you can tell he sees the direction Lemon is going with the interview, and the guy is confused. All right, so we go from being jovial to being a little bit confused and bewildered, and then he does his best to communicate with Lemon. He displays all sorts of body language, and he displays all these emotions. He goes from jovial and happy to being confused to being frustrated.
Don, the only reason I'm doing this interview is because you're on the X platform and you asked for it. Otherwise, I would not do this interview.
And towards the end, you see him display outright disgust and contempt.
But doesn't the buck stop with you? I mean, you're
Don, I have to say, choose your question carefully. There's 5 minutes left.
So you see Elon trying to communicate with Lemon all through the initial minutes of the interview, all right? But Lemon seems completely oblivious to every body language sign Elon displays. And he just keeps on going, digging deeper and deeper into the quagmire of an interview. And again, just as in the case of Nicolas Fouquet, needless to say, there would be hell to pay. As Elon would write immediately after the interview, call one of his assistants with a very simple message: contract cancelled. And this just proves one thing, that human beings are not quite changed that much. And if you would understand human nature and educate yourself a little bit around human psychology, then you will be able to avoid certain traps in life. As it was with Nicolas Fouquet in the 17th century, so it was with Don Lemon in 2024. All because they both disregarded the common law of human behavior. What has now become Robert Greene's first law. In both cases, they either outshone or tried to outshine their masters. And of course, there was hell to pay. And so remember, law number 1, do not outshine the master.